Hello, this is Senior Topics for the third week of November. And as you can see, I've got my decorations. Let me get my handle on this thing out of here. We don't need that in there to rest the decoration idea. There you go, a little bit nicer with the piano. Well, you can't see the piano, but you can see the back of the fireplace, and that's nice to have that for you guys. Okay, so let's look at the third week of November, starting with November 14th, National Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day. And believe it or not, in 1666, the first experimental blood transfusion was done in England between two dogs. So that's kind of interesting. And now blood transfusions is no big deal. On the 15th, Georgia O'Keeffe, the famous author who painted the large murals in the Southwestern themes, was born on November 15th in 1887. It's also America Recycle Day and Pack Your Mom Lunch Day. The 16th is when the child author Jean Fritz was born in 1915. It was the fall of the Inca Empire in 1533, and it's Button Day. Looking at the 17th, Homemade Bread Day. And in this kind of weather, we do like to do a lot of baking. Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific Ocean in 1805, led by a nursing Indian mother, Sacagawea. The first Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1588. On the 18th of November, the Antarctica was discovered by brave explorers in 1820. It is William Tell Day, and he was a hero in Europe. Also, the 18th is Mickey Mouse's birthday. If you like to go to Disneyland, that's probably a really great day to go. November 19th, the Gettysburg Address was delivered in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln. The 19th is the birthday of Indira Gandhi, who was a prime minister of India, and she was born in 1917. Also, Puerto Rico was discovered by Columbus on his second voyage of exploration in 1493. The 20th of November, the traffic light was patented in 1923, and it's Mexico's Revolution Day. And the last one for this week, the 21st, the Mayflower Compact was signed between the Pilgrims and the sailors and the military people in 1620, right before they landed in Massachusetts. It is also World Hello Day. And that's it for the third week of November. Now I want to start in on my unusual tales of Thanksgiving stories. And we're looking at this. First, we're going to take a look at what the Indians were like. They were called Indians because Columbus thought he had discovered India. We call them Native Americans mostly now. The post-Columbian Indians after 1492, the fate of these Indians varied depending on which part of the continent you looked at. The regions of the great American civilizations in Central America and down the western coastal strip of South America with the Aztec, the Maya, and the Inca empires were densely populated when the Spanish arrived. The Spaniards were mostly interested in extracting the wealth of these regions and taking it back to Europe. They did not want to settle there. So the Europeans in Latin America, even today, remain a relatively small upper class governing a population of Indian peasants. But North America, in contrast, was very much less populated and less developed when Europeans arrived. No part of the continent north of Mexico could be defined as reaching a stage of civilization. Many of the tribes lived as hunter-gatherers or as settled Neolithic farmers. The Europeans that arrived in these regions, the French, the British, the Dutch, were interested in making permanent settlements. Much more than the Spanish, they wanted to develop North America as their own home. When Europeans began to settle in North America in the 1600s, the tribes were spread thinly over the continent, speaking hundreds of different languages. Each group of Indian tribes became prominent as the Europeans spread further west. But what we want to look at is the Native Americans who lived on the eastern coast where the Pilgrims and others first settled. The settlers at first needed the help of the Indians in order to survive. Yet the newcomers were also a nervous minority in a strange place and armed with deadly weapons. If there would be any crisis, it was likely that the Europeans would react with sudden and extreme violence. There was a clash of attitudes in relation to the land. The Indians of Eastern America were semi-nomadic. During the spring and summer, they lived in villages and grew their crops. In the winters, they hunted in the thick forests. So land in the Indian view was a communal space to be shared, and it was impossible to own it. The question of land eventually led to horrible conflicts, and the Indians became the inevitable losers. The first successful English settlement at Jamestown in 1607 was in the territory of the Powhatan Confederacy, a group of 9 Algonquian tribes. Here, the Europeans met with an unfriendly reception. Within 2 weeks of their arrival, they suffered an Indian attack, but it was easily fought off with muskets and cannons. By 1622, the colonists numbered more than 1,000. A new chief, Opechancanough, decided on a sudden attack of the English settlements and killed 347 colonists in a single day. In 1623, the English organized a peace conference. Unfortunately, they planned that when the Indians attended, they would be systematically murdered. And this would end the last significant Indian threat to Virginia. When the Pilgrim Fathers up in Massachusetts were struggling on American soil from December 1620, at first they saw no sign of Indians. Later, they discovered the local tribes had been wiped out by a European epidemic brought by Spanish and English sailors. Then in March of 1621, they were visited by Wampanoag Indians who lived 40 miles away. They were the leaders of another Algonquian confederacy. They were friendly and they were not threatened by a small English group. They actually helped the settlers with their agriculture and joined them in their celebration of Thanksgiving. I'd like to show you some pictures. This is what the Indians look like. They were a developed community, but they were not a sophisticated civilization. And here's the Iroquois, were very fierce fighters. And these guys lived in the forests of New York. They called themselves the people of the Longhouse. And then here's the Seminole Indians who lived down more towards Florida and Virginia. You can see they dressed very, very differently. The Chippewa lived in a region in Ontario, Canada, and across Lake Superior into Michigan. Remember, there were hundreds of different tribes, each with their own customs. Now, before the Pilgrims and before the Jamestown settlers, there was another colony, which for a long time we didn't know much about. It's called Roanoke, the Lost Colony. And we think this is one of the settlers that is carving the letters C-R-O into a tree, and the word Croatoan carved into one of their fort posts. People don't know, did the Spanish army capture the colonists? Did the local native people murder them? Did the colonists go off to live with the native people and start a new life when the English ships were prevented by wars from coming back with fresh supplies? Did the colonists try to sail home to England and were lost at sea? No one really knows, and it's really quite a mystery. And they started in 1587. England and Spain were at war, and the English had set up a fort, and they wanted to guard it against the Spanish and any hostile Indians. There was an early colony of 108 men who complained about the harsh conditions and the lack of supplies. They went back to England because they had been poorly prepared for life in the New World, and they had depended upon the native people for food, and yet they treated the natives badly. There were frequent fights, and the colonists had accidentally infected the native people with European diseases. So what were they going to do? And here's John White, who was a leader and an artist, and he drew pictures showing what the people looked like. There were a few women and children, and they had to decide who was going to go back to England and get more food, more seed, more supplies. The colonists were chosen by Sir Walter Raleigh and John White, a loyal Englishman. And White was an artist who had brought back paintings of the new plants, animals, and people. There were close to 20 women, including White's own pregnant daughter, to work in the fields and houses, and almost a dozen children. So there were also 2 native men, part of White's group. One of them, Manteo, had traveled in the company of the English before. There he is. They're going up on the ship to go to England and start this new colony. The colonists left Portsmouth in April of 1587. And here they are, they captured huge tortoises for food. You had to eat a lot of seafood in order to survive. A number of people drank from a pond that had water so evil they fell dreadfully ill. People who washed their faces in the water had swollen eyes for 5 or 6 days after. And here they are, they go to Roanoke, and they were going to meet with the people at Roanoke. And then when White and his men got to the fort, they found it had been razed to the ground. The buildings were slaughtered. There were skeleton remains of some of the colonists. And mysteriously enough, what happened to these guys? All that was left of the soldiers was a single skeleton. And they were trying to find out that what had happened. And here the English are mounting a surprise attack in the middle of the night on the people they thought had killed the English colonists. But it turned out that actually they were not the ones who had killed them. So we know that on August 18, White's daughter Eleanor had given birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. But the colonists were worried. They were quickly running out of supplies. Nobody knew that they had stopped on Roanoke Island. They were supposed to be in Chesapeake, 50 miles to the north. Should they move there? Should they send someone back to England to let Raleigh know of their plight? White was pressured to go. He hated leaving his daughter and new grandchild, but he buried his notebooks, drawings, map, and armor and worked out a special code with the remaining colonists. If you leave, he told them, carve your destination on a tree, put a cross if there has been trouble. And then he set sail. And you know, they were captured by the Spanish Armada and made prisoners of war, and it took them 2 years to get back to England. And nobody wanted to give them supplies, and it was too dangerous to try and get back to the New World. White was wounded twice in hand-to-hand combat. All of the colonists' supplies were stolen. And then there was a storm. Finally, it was March 20, the year 1590. Raleigh gathered enough money to send other ships, but there were storms. White and his men could see smoke rising from the vicinity of the Roanoke fort. They tried to row ashore in small boats through terrible waves. One boat capsized, and many of the men, the rescuers, drowned. They were still having trouble trying to get back to the Roanoke colony. They tried to alert the colonists by sounding a trumpet, by singing English folk songs loudly, by calling out to people on shore by name. No answer. In the morning, they went to the fort. It was completely empty. Carved into a tree near the village were the words Crow, C-R-O. On one of the palisade posts was the word Croatian. There was no cross to signal trouble. All they found inside the fort were bars of iron, pigs of lead, iron shot. Once buried chests lay overturned and ransacked, including White's own possessions. What had happened to the colonists? And what was the fires and the smoke that they had seen a day or two before? John White returned to England a broken-hearted man. Due to storms, politics, money, and history, he never set foot in the New World again. But other explorers did. John Smith, friend of Pocahontas, heard from 2 Indian tribes that clothed men still lived in the area. Later, Pocahontas' father admitted being part of an attack on the colonists. Smith did not speak of this until 14 years after returning to England. Another explorer, William Strachey, heard rumors in 1610, that's 20 years later, of Indians whose slaves built them stone-walled houses. Others heard stories of blue-eyed blonde natives. Although later, centuries later, the Lumbee Indians of North Carolina claimed that their ancestors were both Indian and English. No one really knows for sure. And here's John White in England, wondering, as we still wonder today, archaeologists are still trying to find out, what about the mystery of what happened to those people? Now, the Pilgrims who went to Massachusetts further north fared a lot better. They did go through a lot of problems, including Getting a late start to Massachusetts in the first winter, more than half of their people died. They were not prepared. But they did see an early spring, which brought them hope and health to the survivors. By the way, during that harsh first winter, the children were the main survivors, children 12 and under who had to take care of deathly sick adults who they would bury at night so that the Indians could not guess just how few of them were actually left. The Pilgrims were puzzled in the spring because they had seen Indians at a distance and tools had walked off their sights. But they had not come face to face with a single Indian at Plymouth. One morning late in March, the men of the colony were holding a meeting in the Common House, talking over plans for their little army with their captain, Miles Standish. On top of this hill, we must build a fort, he said. We can man our own weapons and the ones Captain Jones has given us from the Mayflower. He didn't get any further because they heard a frightened scream from the children at play outside. The next moment, a tall, almost completely naked Indian stood in the door of the Common House. The Indian had long, straight black hair cut in bangs across the front and carried a bow. Every man sprang to his feet and made a dive for sword or gun. The tall bronze figure did not flinch, although he did lay his hand on a small hatchet at his belt. His sharp black eyes glanced from face to face. Welcome, Englishmen, he said. The Pilgrims looked as if they had seen a ghost. An almost naked savage was greeting them in their own language. Miles Standish was the first to recover. Look to your guns, men, he whispered. This Indian may not be as friendly as he seems. The Indian quickly said, Samoset is friend of Englishmen. Samoset says, welcome. That is when the leader, William Brewster, stepped forward and gave his hand to the strange visitor. Thank you for your kind words, friend. Where did you learn our language? Samoset is Sagamore of Pemaquid. Many English come in ships to fish and buy skins. He began to give them the names of captains of some of the ships whose crew had fished near his home, and explained to the Pilgrims how he had sailed down the coast from Maine a few months before with a Captain Dermer who had visited Cape Cod. The Pilgrims tossed him a horseman's coat to put on. It was making them shiver to see him standing there without clothing on a windy, breezy March day. All afternoon they talked together. And later, Samoset brought his friend Squanto, who had been captured as a slave by the Spanish, sent back to Spain. He escaped thanks to helpful Catholic priests and smuggled into England. He eventually worked his way over to Greenland and then over to the Cape Cod area and was able to walk and go back to the area where he grew up. He was the only one of his people left because he was a slave in Europe at the time that his village was wiped out by the new diseases brought over by the Europeans. Squanto decided that he would be a friend of the English. He had been converted to Catholicism by the Catholic priests. He was alive because he had been in Europe. So now the Pilgrims knew why they had found bones of Indians lying on the ground when they first arrived. The last Patuxet had died and there was no one left to bury him. This was the reason they found deserted cornfields and gardens. This was the reason they were not attacked in the 3 months they had been living at Accomac. The Indians whom they had seen or met through Samosat were just curious neighbors. They did not belong there either. So Squanto and Samoset helped them make a treaty with Massasoit, the powerful chief of the Wampanoag and overlord of all the Indian tribes for many miles around. And because of the treaty they made and the Thanksgiving dinner they shared, they kept the peace on both sides for over 50 years. So just think what would have happened if he had not been captured by the Spanish and taken to Europe and later brought back. Squanto returned to the little group of worried pilgrims and delivered Massasoit's message. Governor Carver and Miles Standish spoke in low tones. They knew that Massasoit was the most important Indian in this part of New England, so they decided to treat him like royalty. Edward Winslow put on all his armor and pulled his helmet down on his head. He took his sword and some gifts and marched to Massasoit's Hill with Squanto and Samoset. He carried a pair of knives, a chain with a bright colored stone in it, an old earring, a little brandy, some hard ship's biscuit, and a little butter that had been made 9 months earlier in England. He bowed before the Indian chief and said, "King James of England sends the King of the Indians a greeting of love and peace. King James accepts Massasoit as his friend and ally." The Massasoit promised the Wampanoag and the other tribes that were subject to him would not hurt the Pilgrims, or if any of them did, Massasoit would send the guilty Indian to the Pilgrims to be punished. Pilgrims promised that if any of their people injured the Indians, they would do the same. No one believed that day that the treaty talked out by the 2 men sitting on cushions on a green blanket would last for more than 50 years, but that's what it did. And this is only part of the strange but true stories of how we ended up even having a Thanksgiving. Just one of the many miracles that helped create our wonderful, wonderful country. And as we get closer to Thanksgiving, I want to wish you a happy holiday season. And we will continue with more strange but true stories next week. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.